All right, everyone. Hello again, and now we're going to do week 13, Orientalism by Edward Said, and the debate between Foucault and Chomsky. And this week it is Postcolonialism and Postmodernism. And we're going to do Said's Orientalism and how Foucault understands postmodernism. And then we're going to look at Chomsky's approach to global politics. So all of this, like the other chapters, the other weeks, these are critiques. Okay, so when it comes to Orientalism, this is the idea of Edward Said that reality is constructed through discourse, and discourse is language, and he tries to look at how Western journalists, fiction writers, and scholars help create a prevalent view of the Middle East as inferior, degenerate, and stagnant, very backward, and at the same time show the Western world as advanced and progressive and so on, civilized. So there's a juxtaposition of identities. The uncivilized East and the civilized West. And the Western scholar, this is not their intention to make the Middle East look like, backward and so forth. It's just the way that the Western scholar understands. So the Western scholar views the Middle East through a specific lens. And that lens is Western. So you use your Western lens to analyze and understand the East. And sometimes it's not accurate. That's what Orientalism, the concept of Orientalism, is all about. And for Edward Said, no one has ever devised a method for detaching the scholar from the circumstances of life, from the fact of his involvement with a class, a set of beliefs, a social position, or from the mere activity of being a member of society. So Edward Said is basically nullifying any objectivity within scholarship, and he says that there is no production of knowledge that can ever ignore or disclaim the author's involvement as a human subject in his own circumstances. So a European or American studying the Orient cannot really quite understand the Orient because the biases are generating scholarship. And so he looks at the ways in which throughout history for the past 200 centuries, Western scholars that go to the Middle East basically make it seem that the Middle East is this absolutely barbaric place. It is certainly different from the West, but the West, the fact that if Western scholars have not quite really looked at it objectively, and a great example is the movie Aladdin, the Disney movie. You can see Orientalism there. You see that Aladdin looks Western. He's a good guy. Jasmine looks Western, and then you have the bad guy Jafar, looking very Middle Eastern, and so that sort of imbalance is not intentional. It's not on purpose, but it's just a product of Western biases. And even more seriously, though, like when European scholars go, and they use their Western like scholarship to understand the world, then it doesn't work out to be real. And in many ways, these attempts at scholarship has served to justify colonialism, because if you portray the East as this barbaric place, then ultimately you're going to see like, well, they're going to need some civilizing. They need to become more like the West, more advanced. And we see that with scholars. There is a fantastic scholar named Bernard Lewis, and his book, What Went Wrong, when it comes to the Middle East, and he's saying that the Islamic world is a monolithic, angry place anti-Western, when it is far from that. It is not monolithic. It is very diverse, and there are people who love democracy, and there are those who do not. And so it's very complex. But these dichotomies that are created by Western scholarship enforce our understanding of the Middle East, and that is very harmful. And it's not just men who do it, but women do too. There's post-colonial feminists that say that Western women don't really quite understand the male-female dynamic in the Middle East, but yet they want to place upon the Middle East a specific Western feminist understanding of the Middle East. And so when you read the post-colonial literature for the assigned reading, you're going to realize that there is Said is saying that there's the way in which Western scholars have studied the Middle East, it's been inherently wrong, and that's not intentional. It's just based on the inability of the scholar to divorce themselves from or their biases from the situation, and it creates this civilized barbaric dichotomy, like differences, and that may in turn justify military intervention, colonialism, and so forth. So, be aware of that. When you read the literature, when you have your own thoughts of the Middle East, like, for example, a lot of people say that Iraq does not deserve a democracy because they were so stable under Saddam Hussein, and so ultimately that means that Saddam Hussein and a leader like Saddam Hussein is altogether good. I'm very wary of those sorts of arguments because it may or may not be true, but what's wrong with being free? I like freedom. I like the United States. I like the way that they set up their country, and so I'm sure other people and other countries in the Middle East, or maybe that's just that's me, that's Orientalism in me. So it's always interesting to start thinking about that relationship between knowledge and power. So the way we understand the world and the way we think of the Middle East and other places. And from that jumping off point, we'll turn to Foucault and Chomsky. And I know this is very difficult stuff, but use this lecture to kind of form a baseline to attack the readings. So for Foucault, knowledge is a product of power. And so knowledge is never immune from the influence of power. It's never objective. And it mutually reinforces our understanding of a wider political world. So to understand any idea, one has to look at the history of the idea and how power is used to shape and shape our understanding of an issue and our understanding of what we consider truth. So for Foucault, truth is never objective, it's a product of power. And knowledge is situated within a political, historical context. So there's no absolute truth, they're just competing perspectives. So the way that we understand a concept or something, the way that we understand terrorism is a product, for example, terrorism is a product of language. And so let's take September 11th, which was a terrorist attack on the United States. And so many began to link it with Pearl Harbor. So Pearl Harbor was an attack on the United States by Japan. And what happened afterward is that the United States got into a war with Japan. And that war was victorious. But with terrorism, it's very different. It's very different to declare a war on terror because terror is a state of mind. It's not an empire like the Empire of Japan. And so when we consider and we look at September 11th, which was a terrorist attack, if we consider it a terrorist attack, that means terrorism as an idea. We have to first understand what that's all about, and not simply just say, well, we're going to declare war on terror and then remove Saddam Hussein, which basically created even more of a problem, a vacuum in the Middle East, and that vacuum helped create the worst terrorist organization of history, which was the Islamic State. So, for Foucault, power is about control of the social body. All right? So, Foucault wants us to unmask and fight that power. And he says, where there is power, there is resistance. So anytime there is like this, there's power, that means that there's somebody being oppressed within that. So wherever there is power, there is resistance. There's always going to be somebody who is fighting against that power structure. And justice, according to Foucault, is just simply a product of the class struggle. And so he wants us people to always be concerned about how power is being used. Chomsky, on the other hand, has a different vision. He wants a better society. He doesn't just see power as generating oppression, but he sees power as the ability to shape a better future, a just society. And so he's very different from Foucault. And one of his major phrases, Chomsky's approach to global politics, is think globally, act locally. And that's the beginning of a just society. So for Foucault, you always have to be aware of the differences between power and resistance, and how people fight power through this creating a better world, but also that every time that happens, it generates a loser, and that loser resists. Whereas for Chomsky believes that the world can be made a better place by working toward it, by always working forward to create that better state. And so there is definitely differences between the two scholars here. For Foucault sees that there's always going to be this perpetual struggle, that justice is a function of power struggle. With Chomsky, though, he says that one day, if it's a struggle, then one day there will be justice. But that's just not enough for Foucault. Foucault believes in something very different. So I posted parts of their debate in the syllabus, so you can always check that out. That's on YouTube. And so this is a very different week, because it deals primarily with the study of language and teasing out the power structures that exist within language, right? And so Chomsky, it's a bit more like it's possible to achieve a certain utopia, but for Foucault, it's a constant struggle. And for Said is basically looking at language and how language and discourse as developed from Western scholars may be used to oppress or misunderstand people in other countries. So, take your time for this week, go through those the readings, and come back in and watch this lecture, and hopefully you'll get the nuances of the major thinkers in the postmodern, post-colonial world.